My parents held a Facebook charity auction for my spare bedroom without telling me, and that's not even the craziest part of this story. Hi everyone! Today's story will blow your mind, but really quick, if you enjoy this content, hit that subscribe button. Channel's been a bit quiet lately, and your support keeps it all going. Let's jump in. Original post. I, 28M, need advice about my sister, 30F, who thinks she's entitled to my spare bedroom as her personal art studio. This situation has been escalating for weeks, and I'm at my wit's end. For context, I work as a software engineer and bought my 2-bedroom condo last year after saving for 5 years. It's nothing fancy, but it's mine, and I'm proud of what I've accomplished. The spare bedroom serves as my home office, guest room for friends who visit from out of state, and storage for my hiking and camping gear. My sister Emily is an aspiring artist who still lives with our parents in their 4-bedroom house. The trouble started about 6 weeks ago when Emily came over for dinner. She wandered into my spare room and started talking about how perfect the lighting was and how the space was just sitting there, wasted. I laughed it off, thinking she was joking. She wasn't. Over the next few visits, she became increasingly fixated on the room. She'd measure the walls, take photos from different angles, and talk about where she'd put her easel and supply cabinets. When I finally told her directly that the room wasn't available for her use, she acted shocked. But James, you're not even using it. There's barely anything in there. I explained that I do use it, for work when I need to focus away from my main setup, for guests, and for storage. She rolled her eyes and said those weren't real uses. According to her, art is a higher calling that deserves priority over my corporate drone activities. The real problem started when she involved our parents. My mother Patricia called me the next day, her voice dripping with disappointment. James, your sister is trying to pursue her passion. You have all this space, and she's cramped in her tiny bedroom at home. Would it kill you to share? I pointed out that Emily's bedroom at our parents' house is actually larger than mine, and they have a finished basement she could use. Mom's response? The basement doesn't have natural light, and you know how important that is for an artist. My father Michael jumped on the bandwagon too. He sent me a long text about how family helps family, and how I'm being selfish with my resources. He even suggested that having Emily's art in my apartment would add culture to my sterile tech bro environment. The guilt-tripping intensified over the following weeks. Every family dinner became a campaign about Emily's artistic needs. They'd show me her paintings, which, honestly, look like something you'd find at a suburban wine and paint night, and talk about how she just needs the right space to flourish. My mother started sending me articles about successful artists who started in unconventional spaces, completely missing the point that those artists found their own spaces. Emily began showing up unannounced, always with some excuse. I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd say hi. But she'd inevitably end up in the spare room, taking more photos or sketching the layout. Once, I caught her measuring the doorframe to see if her larger canvases would fit through. I've tried to be reasonable. I suggested she look into renting a small studio space or joining an artist collective. She claimed she couldn't afford it, despite working part-time at our parents' friends' gallery and having zero living expenses. I offered to help her research affordable options, but she dismissed everything as not having the right energy. The breaking point came yesterday. Emily texted me while I was at work, asking if she could stop by to drop something off. I said sure, assuming it was something small. When I got home, I found 2 boxes of art supplies in my spare room. Not by the door, not in the living room, actually in the spare room, pushed against the wall like they belonged there. I called her immediately, and she tried to play innocent. Oh, I just needed somewhere to store them temporarily. Mom's reorganizing the house, and there's no room. It's just for a few days, James. Don't be such a control freak. But here's the thing. I texted my mom, and she knew nothing about any reorganization. When I confronted Emily about the lie, she got defensive and started crying, saying I was crushing her dreams and hoarding space like a dragon hoards gold. My parents are now fully on her side. They're saying I'm being heartless, that I should be proud to support my sister's artistic journey, and that family members share resources. They've even hinted that they're disappointed in how I've turned out, valuing material possessions over family bonds. I'm starting to question myself. I worked hard for this condo. I pay the mortgage, utilities, and HOA fees. I use that room regularly, even if it's not filled with stuff 24/7. But my entire family is making me feel like a villain for not giving my sister free access to my home. Am I being unreasonable? Should I just let her use the room to keep the peace? How do I set boundaries without destroying my family relationships? Update 1, 2 weeks later. Well, Things have escalated exactly as many of you predicted. Thank you to everyone who responded to my original post. Your comments gave me the courage to stand firm, but I'm dealing with a situation I never imagined would happen. After my post, I had a long conversation with Emily where I clearly stated that she needed to remove her supplies within 48 hours or I would leave them outside my door for her to pick up. She cried, called me heartless, and hung up. My parents called within minutes, with my mother actually using the phrase, "How could you threaten to throw out your sister's precious supplies?" I held firm and explained that I wasn't throwing anything out. I was simply refusing to store them. The 48-hour deadline passed, and true to my word, I carefully moved the boxes outside my apartment door and texted Emily to pick them up. She let them sit there for 6 hours, apparently hoping I'd cave and bring them back in. When I didn't, she finally came and got them, but not before taking photos of her supplies, abandoned in the hallway, and sending them to our entire extended family group chat with the caption, "This is how much my brother values family." The family drama that ensued was exhausting. I received calls from aunts, uncles, and cousins I barely speak to, all weighing in on the situation. Most sided with Emily after hearing her version, that I had a completely empty room I refused to share while she struggled to pursue her art. I tried explaining my side, but the narrative had already been set. I was the successful, selfish brother refusing to help his struggling artist sister. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. Last Tuesday, I came home to find my apartment door unlocked. My heart dropped. Inside, I discovered Emily in my spare room, actually setting up an easel. She'd somehow gotten a copy of my key. I later learned she'd taken my spare from my parents' house where I'd left it for emergencies, and let herself in. Canvases leaned against the walls. A plastic tarp covered part of my hardwood floor. She'd moved my desk to the corner and pushed my guest bed against the wall to make room for her studio space. The audacity was breathtaking. "Emily, what the hell are you doing?" I demanded. She turned around with this serene smile, paintbrush in hand. "I'm not letting your negativity affect my art anymore, James." This space was calling to me, and I answered. I immediately told her to leave and demanded the key back. She refused, saying she'd made a copy and that I was being emotionally violent by disrupting her creative process. I had to threaten to call the police before she finally started packing up, all while muttering about my toxic masculinity and capitalist mindset. The next morning, my parents showed up at my door. My father looked stern while my mother had clearly been crying. They wanted to have a family meeting about the situation. Against my better judgment, I let them in. What followed was a 2-hour emotional manipulation session. They talked about how Emily had been depressed lately, news to me, how her art was the only thing bringing her joy, and how I had the power to change her life by sharing my space. My mother actually said, "You have no idea what it's like to be a creative person trapped without proper space to express yourself." I pointed out, again, that Emily could use the basement at home, rent a studio space, join an artist collective, convert her own bedroom into a studio. Each suggestion was shot down. The basement had no soul, studio spaces were too expensive, despite her never actually pricing them out. Artist collectives were full of pretentious people, and her bedroom was where she needed to sleep and couldn't have paint fumes. My father then dropped a bombshell. "If you can't share with family, maybe you weren't ready for homeownership. Maybe we were wrong to be proud of you buying this place." That stung. But what hurt more was when my mother added, "We never thought we'd raise such a selfish child. Your sister would give you her last dollar, and you won't even share an empty room." I had to ask them to leave after that. As they walked out, my mother turned back and said, "I hope you think about what kind of person you want to be, James. Because right now, I don't recognize my son." Since then, I've been getting daily texts from various family members. Emily posts passive-aggressive Instagram stories about people who hoard resources and the tragedy of unused creative spaces. She's even started a series of paintings called Locked Doors that she claims are inspired by my rejection of family bonds. The situation reached peak absurdity yesterday when my parents sent me a formal-looking email with the subject line, "Proposal for Space Sharing Agreement." They'd actually drawn up a schedule where Emily would have access to my spare room Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., while you're at work anyway. They presented it as a compromise that would honor both your needs. I declined immediately, but they're persisting. They've even suggested I could take a tax deduction for supporting an artist, though I'm pretty sure that's not how tax law works. I've changed my locks, installed a Ring doorbell, and made clear that Emily is not welcome in my home unsupervised. But the family pressure continues. My uncle called me the family Scrooge, and my grandmother, who I adore, said she was disappointed to see family turning away family. I'm exhausted by this whole situation. Part of me wonders if I should just move and not tell anyone my new address. Is that too extreme? How do I maintain family relationships when they've all decided I'm the villain in Emily's struggling artist narrative? Update 2, 6 weeks after the last update. I genuinely didn't think this situation could get worse, but my family has proven remarkably creative in their boundary stomping. Thank you to everyone who's been following this saga and offering support. Your comments have been a lifeline in maintaining my sanity. After my last update, I thought the new locks and firm boundaries would send a clear message. Instead, it seemed to escalate my family's campaign. Emily pivoted to what I can only describe as guerrilla tactics. It started with accidental encounters. She'd show up at my gym, my regular coffee shop, even my workplace. Each time, she'd have art supplies with her, a sketchbook, a portable easel, paint-stained clothes, as if to remind everyone around us that she was an artist without a proper space. She'd make comments loud enough for others to hear, just trying to find good light to paint in since I don't have a studio, or public spaces are all I have now. The workplace visits were particularly mortifying. She'd tell the receptionist she was my sister and needed to speak to me urgently, then use the opportunity to guilt-trip me in the lobby. My coworkers started asking questions, and I had to explain the situation to my manager when Emily showed up 3 times in 1 week. Then came the social media escalation. Emily started a TikTok series called Artist Without Walls, where she documented herself trying to paint in increasingly absurd locations: park benches in the rain, subway platforms, a McDonald's dining area. Each video ended with some variation of, "When your family won't support your dreams, you make art wherever you can." The videos went semi-viral in our local community, and I started getting recognized as that guy who won't let his sister use his spare room. My parents, rather than being embarrassed by this public spectacle, embraced it. My mother started sharing Emily's videos with captions like, "So proud of my daughter's perseverance," and "True artists find a way." The subtext was clear. I was the obstacle she was persevering despite. The situation took a darker turn 3 weeks ago. I came home to find my landlord in the hallway with Emily and my parents. They'd actually contacted him about potentially adding Emily to my lease as a co-tenant. They'd told him I'd agreed to this but was dragging my feet on the paperwork. Thankfully, my landlord is a reasonable person and wanted to verify with me first. I explained the situation, and he assured me no changes would be made without my explicit consent. He also warned them about trespassing on private property. You'd think being threatened with trespassing charges would stop them. It didn't. Last week, I woke up to find an eviction notice taped to my door. My heart stopped until I read it closely and realized it was fake. A mock eviction Emily had created as part of a new art series about spaces denied and dreams deferred. She'd posted photos of it on Instagram with a long caption about how even seeing this fake notice helped her understand the precariousness of space and belonging. The fake eviction notice was my breaking point. I consulted a lawyer and sent a formal cease and desist letter to Emily and my parents. The letter outlined all instances of harassment, trespassing, and defamation, and warned of legal action if the behavior continued. The family explosion was nuclear. My phone blew up with calls and texts. I was called every name in the book: heartless, cruel, vindictive, spiritually bankrupt, and my personal favorite, a corporate sellout who chose lawyers over love. My grandmother, who I mentioned being disappointed in me, called personally. But instead of more guilt-tripping, she said something unexpected. "James, I've been watching this unfold, and I need to tell you something. Your sister pulled the same thing with your cousin Jessica 5 years ago. Tried to take over her garage for an art studio. Jessica gave in, and Emily destroyed the space and never paid the cleanup costs. Stand your ground." This revelation led to more conversations with extended family, and I learned Emily had a pattern of this behavior. She tried to commandeer spaces from 3 different relatives over the years, each time with our parents' full support and the same struggling artist narrative. Armed with this information, I had one final conversation with my parents. I laid out Emily's pattern of behavior and asked them directly why they continued enabling it. My father's response was telling: "She's sensitive, James. She needs more support than you do. You've always been the strong one." That's when I realized this wasn't really about the room. It was about a dynamic where I'm expected to be the responsible one who gives while Emily gets to be the eternal struggling artist who takes. And my parents, rather than helping Emily develop independence, preferred to pressure me into accommodating her. I made it clear that the cease and desist letter wasn't a bluff. Any further attempts to access my home, manipulate my landlord, or harass me at work would result in legal action. I also informed them that I'd be taking a break from family events until they could respect my boundaries. It's been a week since that conversation. The texts have stopped, the social media posts have shifted away from me, and I've had peace in my own home. But I know this isn't over. Emily has apparently started a new series about finding light in darkness and is looking into artist grants. My parents have gone quiet, which in some ways is worse than the constant contact. I'm in therapy now, working through the guilt and obligation I feel despite knowing I'm not wrong. My therapist has been helping me understand that being the responsible one in the family doesn't mean I have to sacrifice my boundaries for others' wants. We'll update again if there are any major developments. For now, I'm enjoying the ability to use my spare room as I see fit, which this week means it's completely empty except for my yoga mat, and that's exactly how I want it. Update 3, 2 months after the cease and desist. I thought the cease and desist letter would be the end of this story. I should have known better. My family's ability to escalate a situation continues to astound me, and I'm updating because the resolution to this saga is something I never could have predicted. After 2 months of blessed silence, I'd started to relax. I was seeing my therapist regularly, had reconnected with friends I'd been too stressed to see during the worst of the harassment, and was genuinely enjoying my home again. The spare room had become my meditation and workout space, and I'd even started learning guitar, something I'd always wanted to do but never had the quiet space for. Then, 3 weeks ago, my cousin Sarah, not Jessica from the garage incident, texted me, "Have you seen your mom's Facebook? You need to look." No. My stomach dropped. I'd unfollowed my family on social media for my own mental health, so I'd missed the latest development. My mother had posted a lengthy message about hosting a charity auction to support local artists in need of studio space. The centerpiece of this auction? A year's worth of access to a premium creative workspace in a convenient location. It took me a minute to realize she was auctioning off access to MY's spare room. The post had been shared dozens of times, with local art groups expressing interest. My mother had presented it as if I was a willing participant who was finally opening his heart to the artistic community. She'd even included photos of my spare room, photos I realized Emily must have taken during her brief invasion. I immediately called my lawyer. While my mother hadn't technically trespassed or directly violated the cease and desist, this was a clear escalation that required response. He drafted a public statement that I posted on all platforms, clarifying that 1. I had not authorized any auction of my private property. 2. Anyone who won this auction would not be granted access to my home. 3. Any attempts to access my property based on this false auction would be considered trespassing. 4. I was considering legal action for fraud. The post went viral in our community. The contrast between my mother's generous auction post and my legal response created a local scandal. The art community was divided, some calling me selfish, others pointing out the obvious issue with auctioning off someone else's property without permission. But here's where things took an unexpected turn. A local journalist reached out, wanting to do a story on the situation. I initially declined, but after she explained she'd already interviewed Emily and my parents, who painted me as a heartless obstacle to art, I agreed to share my side. The resulting article was illuminating. The journalist had done her homework. She'd found records of Emily receiving 3 art grants over the past 5 years, totaling $15,000, with no completed projects to show for it. A history of Emily starting and abandoning artist collective spaces after disputes about cleanup and rent. 2 small claims court cases where former roommates sued Emily for property damage related to her art. The fact that my parents had a 2,500 square foot basement that they'd refused to let Emily use because they didn't want the mess. The article presented a very different narrative than the struggling artist denied space by cruel brother story my family had been spinning. It was titled The Space Between, When Family Boundaries and Artistic Ambitions Collide. The response was immediate. Emily's TikTok followers started questioning her narrative. Local artists who'd been sympathetic began sharing their own stories of people who expected free spaces without reciprocation. The auction was quietly cancelled. But the real shock came a week later. Emily showed up at my door. Alone. No parents, no art supplies, no camera filming for social media. Just her. "I read the article," she said quietly. "Can we talk?" Against my better judgment, I let her in. What followed was the first honest conversation we'd had in years. Emily admitted she'd been terrified of failing as an artist. The grants she'd received and squandered had paralyzed her with pressure. She'd focused on getting the perfect space as a way to avoid actually creating. As long as she could blame her lack of productivity on not having a studio, she didn't have to face the possibility that she might not be the artist she dreamed of being. "I've been using you as an excuse," she said, tears streaming. "If my mean brother would just give me his spare room, then I'd make amazing art." But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. I've had spaces before. I've had money. I've had time. And I've wasted all of it. She apologized for the harassment, the lies, and especially for turning our family against me. She admitted our parents had always enabled her because they, too, were caught up in the romance of having an artist daughter. It was easier to blame my lack of support than face the fact that Emily was self-sabotaging. I wish I could say I immediately forgave her, but I'm not there yet. I told her I appreciated her honesty but that the damage to our relationship and my relationships with our parents was severe. Trust would take time to rebuild, if it could be rebuilt at all. Emily nodded, understanding. Then she said something that genuinely surprised me. I'm getting a job. A real job, not part-time at a gallery. And I'm going to rent my own studio space. A small one I can afford. And I'm going to therapy to figure out why I keep doing this to people. She left after that, and I haven't heard from her since. But I've noticed changes. Her social media has shifted from artist without walls content to pictures of her actually creating art in what looks like a small but legitimate studio space. She's posted about her new job at a marketing firm and seems to be taking it seriously. My parents are another story. They're furious with the journalist for airing family business, and with me for participating in the article. They've doubled down on their position that I should have just given Emily the room and avoided all this drama. I've maintained my boundaries and haven't resumed regular contact. The unexpected silver lining? The article brought me into contact with other people who've dealt with similar family boundary issues. I've joined a support group, and it's been incredibly validating to hear stories from others who've been labeled the selfish one for maintaining reasonable boundaries. My spare room remains my spare room. I've added some plants and better lighting, not for art, but because I like how it looks. Sometimes I sit in there with my guitar, enjoying the natural light my sister was so obsessed with, and I feel peaceful. It's my space, in my home, that I worked hard for. And that's enough. I don't know if Emily will stick to her new path. I don't know if my parents will ever understand why what they did was wrong. But I know I did the right thing by standing firm, even when it felt like the whole world was against me. To everyone facing similar situations, your boundaries matter. Your space matters. And family isn't a free pass to trample over either. Final update, 4 months later. This will be my final update on this situation. When I started posting about my sister wanting my spare room for her art studio, I never imagined it would escalate the way it did, or that it would ultimately lead to such a profound shift in my family dynamics. It's been 4 months since Emily showed up at my door with her apology. In that time, I've watched from a distance as she's seemingly transformed her life. She's been working full-time at the marketing firm, and from what I can see on social media, she's actually thriving. She posts regular updates from her small rented studio, a 200-square-foot space in an old warehouse that's been converted for artists. The paintings she's producing there are noticeably different from her earlier work. There's a maturity and depth that wasn't there before, as if facing her own limitations finally freed her to create authentically. Last month, she invited me to her first solo exhibition at a small local gallery. The show was titled Boundaries, a series of paintings exploring personal space, limitations, and growth. I wasn't going to go, but my therapist encouraged me to consider it as part of my own healing journey. I went on the last day, during a quiet afternoon hour. Emily wasn't there, which I think was intentional on her part. But our parents were. The centerpiece of the exhibition was a large painting of a door, half open, half closed. The artist's statement beside it read, "For years, I believed that if I could just get through certain doors, I'd find my artistic self waiting on the other side. I spent so much time trying to force doors open that I never noticed the creative space that existed within my own boundaries. This painting represents the moment I stopped trying to invade other people's spaces and started building my own." My mother was standing in front of this painting, crying silently. When she saw me, she didn't rush over or make a scene. She just nodded. My father stood beside her, looking older than I remembered. We ended up having coffee at a shop nearby. It was the first time we'd really talked since the cease and desist letter. They didn't start with apologies or justifications. Instead, my mother said, "We've been seeing a family therapist. Emily insisted we go if we wanted to maintain a relationship with her." The conversation that followed was unlike any we'd ever had. They talked about their own fears, how Emily's struggles had triggered their anxiety about being good parents, how they'd overcompensated by enabling her, how they'd parentified me from a young age and then resented when I acted like the adult they'd forced me to become. "We turned you into the responsible one and then punished you for it," my father admitted. "When you bought your condo, part of us was proud, but part of us was angry. Why did you get to achieve your dreams when Emily was struggling? It wasn't fair to think that way, but we did." They apologized, real, specific apologies, not the generic "we're sorry if you felt hurt" type. They acknowledged the harassment, the manipulation, the attempt to auction off my space, the emotional abuse disguised as family obligation. They even apologized for things I hadn't fully processed, like how they'd always expected me to be the one to compromise, to give in, to be the bigger person, since I was a child. I wasn't ready to forgive everything immediately, and I told them that. But I agreed to consider family therapy together, with clear boundaries about what I would and wouldn't discuss. That was 6 weeks ago. We've had 4 sessions so far. They're painful and difficult, but also oddly healing. The therapist has been excellent at calling out patterns and helping us communicate without falling into old dynamics. Emily and I have had our own separate reconciliation. She's maintained her job, her studio, and her therapy. She even paid back some money she owed me from years ago, loans I'd written off and forgotten about. When I protested that she didn't need to, she insisted. "I'm done taking from you," she said. "It's time I started giving back." Last week, she asked if she could see my spare room, not to use it, just to see what I'd done with it. I hesitated but agreed. She walked in, looked around at my guitar corner, meditation space, and reading nook, and smiled. "It's perfect," she said. "It's so you. I'm sorry I tried to take that away." Then she handed me a small wrapped canvas. "I made this for you. You don't have to hang it or keep it. I just wanted you to have it." It was a painting of 2 doors side by side, one closed with a guitar leaning against it, one open revealing art supplies and natural light. At the bottom, she'd written, "Thank you for teaching me that boundaries create space for everyone to grow." It now hangs in my living room, not in the spare room, which remains my private space, but in a place where I can see it daily as a reminder of how far we've all come. The irony isn't lost on me. Emily is creating better art in her tiny rented studio than she ever did when she had access to larger spaces. She recently sold several pieces and is saving for a bigger studio, one she'll pay for herself. She's even started teaching weekend workshops called Creating Within Constraints for artists struggling with similar space and boundary issues. My parents are working on their own boundaries too. They've stopped the emotional manipulation tactics and are learning to have relationships with both Emily and me as individuals, not as extensions of their expectations. It's a work in progress, but it's progress nonetheless. As for me, I've learned so much through this experience. I've learned that standing firm on boundaries isn't selfish, it's necessary for healthy relationships. I've learned that being the responsible one doesn't mean I have to sacrifice my needs for others' wants. Most importantly, I've learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is refuse to enable their self-destructive behavior. My spare room remains my sanctuary. Sometimes I play guitar there, sometimes I meditate, sometimes I just sit and enjoy the natural light that once caused so much conflict. Friends stay there when they visit. I work there when I need a change of scenery. It's exactly what I always said it was, a multi-purpose space that serves my needs in my home. To everyone who supported me through this journey, thank you. Your validation and advice kept me sane when I was doubting myself. To those facing similar situations, remember, your space is your space, your boundaries are valid, and real family respects both. I'm closing this chapter now, with a family that's broken but healing, a sister who's finding her own way, and a spare room that's exactly what it should be, mine.